So this is the location, the best that I can figure, and I'm like 90% certain this is it. To actually be 100% certain, we would have to do an archaeological survey here and find detritus from the battle, which in this case would be an obscene amount of projectiles fired at the Partisan Rangers under command of Lieutenant Patton Inks by 500 men of the 18th Iowa Infantry and approximately 200 soldiers of the 1st Arkansas Cavalry, U.S. On the morning of October the 15th in 1863, a combined brigade of regular Confederate cavalry and Partisan Rangers under the command of Major Buck Brown, who at the time might have been a captain, engaged in an attempt to take a Federal Wagon train composed of approximately 200 Federal supply wagons, which was headed from Cassville, Missouri, supply depot about 9 to 10 miles up the road from here, to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and then on to Fort Smith to supply the Federal garrisons there. Now, this is the best we can figure from the descriptions we've been given where the fight happened. Actually, on the other side of this fence, this hill behind us is where I believe the Federals were encamped on the southern edge of the timber there, and this open field makes a perfect logical spot for them to pull over 200 wagons and park them. Now, in W.H. Moore's account in the Confederate Veteran, he writes here, "I will tell you what we charged. The Federal train was camped in an old field about 300 yards wide by 1/4 of a mile long." That is almost exactly the measurements of this open field here. Looking straight across here from where we're standing on the wire road to the west, that direction that we're looking at, is a little over 300 yards in that direction, about 400 in that direction. This is approximately that width. If you look north and south running along this field, from the edge of the timber there to the edge of the timber down here, it's approximately 1/4 of a mile. So W.H. Moore goes on in his account. The Federal train was camped in an old field about 300 yards wide by 1/4 of a mile long, with 500 infantry and 200 cavalry on the south side of the field and the edge of the timber, with 2 pieces of artillery on the hillside. So that's a bit confusing because the south side of the field would be down here. But it doesn't make sense. It's the way this account's written is a little confusing, but you got to remember this was written, what, 40 or 50 years after this happened. But he goes on, 2 pieces of artillery on the hillside. That's a noticeable hill right there, and if you look at a topographic map, you can see that that thing rises up a couple hundred feet. But this could also be from here. It just really depends on the perspective that this is being written from. He says, "We were well armed and well mounted, having from 2 to 4 Colts and Remington's pistols apiece, and we moved on them like a cyclone. The Federals had made their fires to get breakfast, but it was not yet light enough to see well. We were challenged and asked who we were by a Federal officer. Lieutenant Inks replied, 'Confederate soldiers,' and we opened fire, and they stampeded like wild cattle. We deployed in front of the train and continued to fire on the infantry until they reached the edge of the timber on the south side of the field." Again, this is the south side of the field. That's what's really throwing me off here. I'm a little confused about. Where the cavalry and artillery were stationed. Okay. All right. So while the main body of troops under the command of Colonel Brooks, who was formerly the commander of the 34th Arkansas Infantry, waited about a mile from here, these 30 Partisan Rangers, handpicked by Lieutenant Patton Inks from Beatty's, Buchanan's, and Brown's companies of the Arkansas Partisan Rangers, Lieutenant Patton Inks had picked 30 men, and W.H. Moore here names all of them but 8. So we know who was in here. I mean, Cole Amaro was here, Polk Crozier, Charlie McClellan, Guy Blake, John Norwood, the notorious Hugh Crawford, Montgomery Wilson, of course, W.H. Moore was here. That the list is here of 22 names. While these men were engaged with 700 Federals, waiting for Colonel Brooks to come up and support them like he said he was, it was still dark. So they were firing at them from the darkness. And the Federals did not realize how many men they were fighting. They had no idea. So as the sun begins to come up, they attacked them right before the sun came up, and they found the Federal camp because they heard them blowing reveille and saw them setting their fires to cook breakfast. But as those 30 Partisan Rangers fought on horseback in skirmish order, the Federals began to mobilize and prepare themselves to defend the wagon. Now, at that point, the Confederates, the partisans, had overtaken the wagon train. They were between the Federals and the wagons. That's why I think he's a little confused. He says the south side of the field. I think he means the north side of the field, the southern edge of the timber. It makes more sense to me. The wagon train wouldn't be parked in the timber. It would have been parked in the open. And right up the road here, about a quarter of a mile, you can see where there's a pull-off, and it would have made sense that the wagon train would have been in this field right here behind me in this open field. That means the Confederates would have charged. They would have run off the pickets. They say that they killed one of the pickets outright, captured 3, and 1 ran away. But that kind of conflicts with the Federal accounts. The Federal accounts say that 4 men, 1 was captured, 2 were killed outright, and 1 was mortally wounded. That one that was mortally wounded was most likely the guy that John Norwood chased down and shot twice in the back with his Remington pistol. The man did not fall off of his pistol until he made it into the Federal camp. Probably died of those wounds. He had 2 bullets in his back. But somewhere out here is where that happened. As the sun came up, the Federals began to mobilize. They looked and they realized at that point, there's only 30 of these guys out here. We can take them. So they start to form into line, and they begin to advance across the field. W.H. Moore tells us that they advance across the field. About sunrise, the infantry and cavalry formed a line and moved down on us. When about 100 yards from us, commenced firing. Comrade J. Montgomery Wilson tells of the experience after they opened fire on us. I had been in some close places, but I do not remember anywhere that they were shooting so close to me. I know I heard bullets over me, behind me, before me, and under my horse, and realized that they were very close. When we could hold the train no longer, we moved out of the field without the loss of a man or horse. Comrade Wilson thinks we held the field for approximately 1 hour. I remember well the sun was shining when we left the field. The only things General Brooks did, Colonel Brooks, was to form the brigade in line a half mile from the field where we were engaged and deploy Captain Buchanan's company as skirmishers. Please do not ask me why he did not move forward and take possession of that train. So the great mystery is, why did Brooks not move up and support his men like he said he was? They could have come screaming out of the darkness, overrun this train, inflicted enough casualties and terror on the Federals to kill the majority of them or capture them, and had 200 wagons and 500 to 700 prisoners to show for it, or at least sent these guys running and captured some of the wagons. It's a great mystery. But from everything that I've done, from all the research that I've done, from the maps that I've looked at, this is where I believe this happens. We are approximately 8, 9 miles south of the current town of Washburn, which at the time was called Old Keatsville. There are several different spellings. When you look at this map here, this is the field, the open field that we're looking at. This kind of lays out what it looked like during the period. The clear spaces are open fields. The other is wooded areas. This lines up perfectly with the modern topographic maps. And there we are standing right here. So this is where I believe the fight happened. So out in this field, early on the morning before the sun came up, October 15th, 1863, John Norwood, Polk Crozier, several of those other heroes fought right here. 30 men fighting against 700 Federals. Now, you think about Montgomery Wilson saying that he'd never seen or experienced such intense fire in the war. That's hard to imagine because he fought at the Second Battle of Corinth and Iuka and Farmington and places like that. But consider this. At those battles, Montgomery was won in a massive formation of Confederates that stretched on for miles. So the fire wasn't concentrated in one place. Here, the fire from approximately 700 Federals and 2 pieces of artillery was concentrated into the area that 30 men on horseback could cover. So that means a cone of fire was being put down from 700 men onto 30 men, which made it much more concentrated. And somehow, some way, by the grace of God perhaps, or just the fact that Federals can't shoot that well, not a man nor horse was hit. Now, if you ask Colonel LaRue Harrison, he lied, and in his report he said that 15 Confederates were killed and many more were wounded, and he makes it seem as if they tangled with the entire Confederate force. And we know for a fact from several accounts that Colonel Brooks and the main Confederate force were not engaged. So this was 30 men, 30 hard-as-nails Arkansas Partisan Rangers, standing the line, driving into a Federal camp of 700 men, attacking them, and fighting them for up to or over an hour. As the sun came up, the Federals regrouped. They realized that these guys were not reinforced. They drove them from the field, and the Confederates missed their chance to have a juicy prize somewhere right out here in this field.